I never expected my success to become my family's greatest shame. But standing in my parents' lavishly decorated dining room on Christmas Eve, watching my mother's face contort with disgust as I described my latest business venture, I realized some people prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. My name is Marcus Sullivan, and this is the story of how I went from family disappointment to the owner of my parents' dream mansion. Though looking back, I'm not sure which title weighs heavier. The evening had started like any other family gathering at the Sullivan estate, a sprawling Victorian mansion my parents had stretched themselves thin to purchase 5 years ago. My sister Amanda, the golden child with her perfect law degree and politician husband, had already arrived with her 2 children. They were seated at the mahogany dining table that had been in our family for generations, everyone dressed in their Christmas best. I adjusted my simple blue sweater, suddenly feeling underdressed among their designer outfits. But then I reminded myself that the watch on my wrist cost more than their combined wardrobes, not that anyone would recognize the understated timepiece for what it was. That was the thing about real wealth. It didn't need to announce itself. "Marcus," my mother called out, her voice carrying that familiar note of disappointment. "You're late again. I suppose punctuality isn't important in your— what are you calling it these days? Your startup?" I took my assigned seat, the wobbly chair at the far end of the table, as far from the head as possible. Some things never changed. "Actually, Mom, we just closed our Series B funding round. $15 million in new investment." The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda's husband Richard snorted into his wine glass. $15 million? Come on, Marcus. We all know these tech companies inflate their numbers. What do you really do all day? I could have told them about the revolutionary AI architecture we developed, about our contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies, about the acquisition offers I'd already turned down. Instead, I just smiled and reached for the bread basket. "We solve problems, Richard. Big ones. Problems." My father finally spoke up from the head of the table, his voice carrying the weight of decades of disapproval. "The only problem I see is you wasting your life on these fantasies. Your sister made partner at her firm this year. What have you achieved?" I watched as Amanda preened under our father's praise, adjusting her perfectly styled hair. "Daddy's right, Marcus. It's time to grow up. I could get you an interview at the firm. Something entry-level, of course. You'd have to work your way up." "That's very kind," I said, cutting into my turkey. "But I'm good where I am." My mother's fork clattered against her plate. "Good? Good? You live in that tiny apartment, drive that old car, and wear the same clothes year after year. How is that good?" What they didn't know was that my tiny apartment was actually the entire top floor of one of the city's most exclusive buildings. My old car was a deliberately understated luxury model with custom engineering. And my same clothes were handmade by artisans who didn't advertise their work with logos or labels. But before I could respond, Richard jumped in. "I heard through some contacts that your company's burning through cash. No real revenue, just fancy presentations and big promises. Classic tech bubble stuff." I raised an eyebrow. "Your contacts?" "I have friends in venture capital," he boasted, straightening his tie. "They say your whole sector is about to crash. Smart money's getting out." I had to suppress a laugh. The smart money he was referring to was likely the Mills Brothers Fund, the same one that had practically begged to lead our latest funding round. I turned them down, preferring to work with investors who actually understood our technology. "Richard," I said calmly, "maybe your friends should do better due diligence." My mother slammed her hand on the table, making the crystal glasses jump. Stop it. Stop pretending to be successful. You're just a useless dreamer, living in a fantasy world, while your sister actually makes something of herself. Dad nodded along, his face stern. Your mother's right. This has gone on long enough. Either get a real job, or stop coming to these family events. We can't keep watching you throw your life away. I looked around the table, at my father's expensive watch, my mother's new jewelry, Amanda's designer dress. All the trappings of wealth they could barely afford, bought with credit and appearances to keep up with the neighbors. I knew about their mounting debts, the missed mortgage payments, the tax liens they were hiding. Being on several bank boards had its advantages. Maybe you're right, I said quietly, standing up. Maybe it's better if I stop coming around for a while. Finally, my mother sighed. He sees reason. I walked to the door, then paused. Oh, and Mom, Dad, you might want to check your mailbox more carefully. Those certified letters from the bank usually contain important information. Their faces paled slightly, but I was already walking out, closing the heavy front door behind me. As I got into my old car, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to my CIO. Start the process. Everything we discussed. They had no idea what was coming. But in 3 months, they'd learn exactly how useless their son really was. I pulled away from the mansion, watching it shrink in my rearview mirror. Soon, it would have a new owner. And the real estate agent's call would just be the beginning of their education about success, appearance, and the true meaning of value. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying someone's world. Sometimes it's about letting them destroy it themselves, then buying the pieces at market value. The Christmas lights twinkled mockingly in the distance as I drove home to my tiny apartment, already anticipating the meeting with the bank's foreclosure department scheduled for the new year. After all, what's the point of being a useless dreamer if you can't make a few dreams come true? And this one was just getting started. January arrived with a flurry of certified letters to the Sullivan mansion. Each one bore the same message. The grace period was over. My father had leveraged everything to maintain their lifestyle. The house, their retirement accounts, even Amanda's trust fund. Now it was all coming due. I watched from my office on the 47th floor as my plan unfolded. The view of the city stretched out before me, snow falling softly on the streets below. My assistant, Sarah, entered with a stack of reports. The bank board approved your proposal unanimously, she said, placing them on my desk. They were quite impressed by your strategy for handling distressed luxury properties. I nodded, scanning the documents. And the other matter? Your sister's law firm just lost their biggest client. Apparently, someone convinced their entire tech division to switch legal representation. Sarah's lips twitched slightly. Their partner track might be experiencing some delays. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about Amanda's smug face at Christmas dinner. She'd been so certain of her superiority, never suspecting that her precious law firm depended heavily on clients who respected my opinion. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Need to talk. Urgent. Financial matter. I ignored it, just as I'd ignored the last dozen messages from various family members. Instead, I pulled up the real estate listings on my laptop. The Sullivan Mansion, once the crown jewel of Oakwood Heights, was now featured prominently in the distressed properties section. 3 weeks after Christmas, my mother tried a different approach. I found her waiting in my company's lobby, dressed in her finest outfit, pretending she just happened to be in the area. Marcus, she said, trying to hide her shock at the sleek, modern office space. "Why haven't you returned our calls? We're family." I gestured for her to follow me to my private conference room, glass-walled, overlooking the city center. Her eyes widened at the view, at the obvious signs of success she'd refused to see before. "Family," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "Is that what we were at Christmas?" She had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "We were harsh, but we worry about you. And now," she twisted her hands together, designer bracelet catching the light. "Now we need your help. The bank, they're being unreasonable. Your father's business has hit a rough patch. That's all. If you can just loan us." "How much?" I interrupted. $2 million, she said quickly. "Just until things turn around. With your startup doing so well." I pulled up some documents on the conference room's display. "You mean the startup that was burning through cash? The one that made me a useless dreamer?" I scrolled through page after page of financial statements. "The one that just acquired your husband's largest competitor for $300 million. Mom's face went pale as she read the headlines, the acquisition announcements, the glowing profiles of our technology in major business publications. But Richard said—" "Richard?" I said calmly. "Gets his information from golf buddies and cocktail parties. I get mine from boardrooms and bank vaults. Speaking of which," I pulled up another document. "Did you know he's been lying about his own firm's finances? That bonus he's been bragging about. It bounced. Twice." She sank into one of the leather chairs, her carefully constructed world crumbling. "Marcus, please. We're about to lose everything." "No, Mom. You're about to learn the difference between appearing successful and being successful." I stood up, straightening my custom-made jacket. "The bank's foreclosure proceedings will continue. I suggest you start looking for a new place to live." "We'll be homeless," she cried. "Oh, I doubt that. Amanda's condo has a spare room, doesn't it? Though you might find it a bit cramped." I smiled, remembering all her comments about my tiny apartment. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with some venture capitalists. Real ones, not Richard's golf buddies." After she left, I called my real estate agent. "How's the Sullivan property looking?" "Bank's putting it up for auction next month. Given the market conditions and the property's issues, it should go for well below market value." "Perfect. Have everything ready. And make sure the purchase is made through one of our subsidiary holding companies. I don't want my name appearing until exactly the right moment." February brought record snowfall and a cascade of financial disasters for my family. Dad's business contracts dried up as word spread about his financial troubles. Amanda's partner track derailed as her firm struggled with departing clients. Richard's golf club quietly revoked his membership over unpaid dues. I watched it all from a distance, receiving regular updates, but never responding to their increasingly desperate messages. Each one reminded me of different Christmas dinners, different insults, different moments of dismissal and derision. The foreclosure notice appeared in the local paper on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, my mother had called 17 times. On Thursday, my father swallowed his pride and came to my office. He looked older, grayer, the weight of his collapsing empire evident in the slump of his shoulders. "Son," he said, the words sounding foreign on his lips. "I know we've had our differences." "Differences?" I kept my voice neutral. "Is that what we're calling it now?" "I was wrong," he admitted, staring at his hands. "About your business, about your choices. I see that now. But please, this house, it's your mother's dream home. We can't lose it." I pulled out my phone, showing him an email. You already have. The bank is auctioning it next week. Unless you can come up with $2 million by Monday, it's over. $2 million, he whispered. The same amount your mother asked to borrow. Interesting coincidence, I agreed. Unfortunately, my company has already allocated those funds to a different real estate investment. His eyes narrowed. You're buying properties now. Among other things, it's amazing what you can do with actual revenue and solid business fundamentals. He left my office a broken man, finally understanding that his son had surpassed him in every way that mattered. But he still didn't know the best part. That revelation would come at the auction, when the new owner's name was finally revealed. March arrived with unseasonable warmth, melting away the last traces of winter just in time for the auction. I didn't attend personally. That would have spoiled the surprise. Instead, I sent my lawyer with clear instructions and waited in my office for the call. It came just after noon. It's done, my lawyer said. Property acquired at 30% below market value. The paperwork will be public record within the hour. I smiled, imagining the scene that would unfold when my family's realtor saw the name on the deed. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just about winning. It's about teaching a lesson that can never be forgotten. And this lesson was about to hit home in the most literal way possible. The meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. at Maxwell and Associates Real Estate. My family had no choice but to attend. The bank required all parties to be present for the final property transfer. I arrived early, parking my old car where I could watch them arrive. Amanda came first, her designer clothes now looking slightly worn, her perfect hair showing traces of gray she couldn't afford to cover anymore. Richard skulked in behind her, his former swagger replaced by a nervous twitch. My parents arrived last, Mother dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, Father looking like he'd aged a decade in 3 months. I waited until they'd all gone inside before following. The receptionist recognized me immediately. After all, I owned the building through one of my holding companies. They're in the main conference room, Mr. Sullivan, she said quietly. Everything's prepared exactly as you requested. Jessica Maxwell, the real estate agent, was already midway through her presentation when I slipped into the back of the room. None of my family members turned around. They were too focused on the documents being displayed on the screen, papers that would officially transfer their beloved mansion to its new owner. As you can see, Jessica was saying, the property was purchased at auction by Horizon Ventures LLC, a subsidiary of. She stopped, finally noticing me. Oh, Mr. Sullivan, I didn't realize you'd be joining us personally. 4 heads whipped around, faces showing various stages of shock and confusion. Marcus, my mother whispered, what are you doing here? I walked to the front of the room, each step measured and deliberate. Please continue, Jessica. You are about to explain who purchased the property. She nodded, clicking to the next slide. As I was saying, the property was purchased by Horizon Ventures LLC, a subsidiary of Summit Innovation Group, whose CEO and majority shareholder is. She paused, letting the moment build. Marcus Sullivan. The silence that followed was absolute. I could almost hear the pieces clicking into place in their minds. Richard found his voice first. You bought the mansion? Actually, I said, settling into the chair at the head of the table, my father's usual position. I bought a distressed property at market value. The fact that it happens to be your mansion is merely an interesting coincidence. But Amanda's voice cracked. But how? Your startup. My company. I corrected her. which is now valued at just over $1 billion, thanks to our recent technological breakthroughs and strategic acquisitions, including, I believe, your law firm's largest client. Her face went pale as she finally made the connection. You were behind that? Along with Richard's club membership being revoked, Dad's contracts drying up, and several other recent developments. I spread my hands. Amazing how many doors open when you actually build something of value instead of just pretending to be valuable. My father's face had turned an interesting shade of red. This is revenge, then, for Christmas? Revenge? I laughed softly. No, this is a business transaction. The revenge was watching you all slowly realize that the son you called useless had built an empire right under your noses. The son you mocked now owns the roof over your heads. Mother began to cry, but her tears didn't move me. I'd seen too many of her performative breakdowns over the years. So what now? Amanda asked. You'll throw us out? Make us homeless? I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Inside, you'll find a rental agreement. The property will be managed by my company, and you can continue living there as tenants. The rent is set at market rate. No family discounts. If you can afford it, you can stay. And if we can't, Richard challenged, though his voice lacked its usual confidence, then I believe Amanda's condo has that lovely spare room you can use, though it might be a bit cramped. I smiled, remembering their comments about my apartment. Of course, you'll have to pay rent there too. I bought that building last week. The room erupted in chaos. Amanda burst into tears. Richard started making threats. Mother wailed about family loyalty. Only Father remained silent, staring at me with what might have been the first glimmer of respect I'd ever seen from him. I let them vent for a moment before standing. The rental agreement needs to be signed by Friday. If you choose not to sign, you'll need to vacate the property by the end of the month. Jessica will handle the details. I headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. They all looked up, faces showing a mix of anger, fear, and dawning respect. Merry Christmas. A bit late, I know, but better than never, just like recognizing someone's true worth. The door clicked shut behind me, cutting off their responses. In the lobby, I nodded to the receptionist and stepped out into the spring sunshine. My phone was already buzzing with messages, probably more pleas and accusations from family members. I turned it off. Instead of heading back to my office, I drove to the mansion. The grand old house stood exactly as it had that Christmas night. But now I saw it differently. Not as a symbol of my family's rejection, but as a monument to how far I'd come. I parked in the circular driveway and walked up to the front door, inserting my new key. The foyer echoed with my footsteps as I wandered through the rooms, memories mixing with possibilities. In the dining room, I stopped at my old seat, the wobbly chair at the far end of the table. Taking out my phone, I sent a quick text to my assistant. Have the entire house remodeled. New furniture, new everything. But keep one piece, the wobbly chair at the end of the dining table. Frame it and put it in my office. Sometimes success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. And sometimes the best revenge isn't about making others lose everything. It's about showing them exactly what they failed to see. As for my family, they signed the rental agreement on Friday. Now they live in my house, drive past my company's headquarters, and wake up every day to fresh reminders that the useless dreamer they mocked owns the world they thought they ruled. But the biggest change wasn't in their circumstances, it was in their eyes. Gone was the contempt, the dismissal, the casual cruelty. In its place was something new, understanding. Understanding that success isn't about appearances or pretense. It's about building something real, something valuable, something that lasts. And in the end, that understanding was worth more than any mansion could ever be. These days, when I host family dinners in my newly remodeled mansion, everyone gets comfortable chairs. Everyone, that is, except for the empty wobbly chair at the far end, kept as a reminder that sometimes the person you put in the worst seat at the table might just end up owning it. And for a useless dreamer, that's not a bad ending at all. The roast was getting cold, but nobody at the Miller family dinner table seemed to notice. They were too busy dissecting my latest failure. A bank teller, Michael? Really? My father's voice dripped with disdain as he cut into his meat. 4 years at Stanford Business School to become a bank teller. I took another sip of wine, letting the expensive Bordeaux, which I'd brought but nobody had acknowledged, roll across my tongue. At 32, I'd learned that silence was often the best response to these Sunday dinner interrogations. Your brother's making partner at his law firm, Mom chimed in, right on cue. And your sister just closed that huge real estate deal in Miami. Ah, yes, the golden children. James with his prestigious law degree, and Sarah with her thriving real estate empire. The pride of the Miller family. It's actually personal banking advisor, I corrected quietly, knowing it wouldn't matter. Dad's fork clattered against his plate. Oh, excuse me, personal banking advisor, like that's any better. He leaned forward, his face flushing with familiar disappointment. Do you know what people say? Their faces when they ask what my Stanford graduate son is doing with his life. I did know. I knew exactly what people said, especially the board members of First Atlantic Bank, the institution where I worked as a supposedly humble advisor. The same board members who had no idea that I actually owned 71% of the bank through a complex web of holding companies and investment vehicles. Robert, maybe we should, Mom started, but Dad was on a roll. You're nothing but a disappointment, he sneered, jabbing his fork in my direction. All that potential wasted. We spent a fortune on your education. And for what? I thought about the document sitting in my office downtown. The loan application my parents had submitted to save their struggling manufacturing business. The same application that would cross my desk tomorrow morning, though they had no idea I controlled the bank's major lending decisions. I'm doing fine, Dad, I said softly. Fine. He barked out a laugh. You call this fine? Living in that tiny apartment, driving that 10-year-old car, working as a glorified clerk. The tiny apartment was actually a penthouse I owned through a shell corporation. The old car was deliberately chosen to maintain my cover. But they didn't need to know that. Not yet. At least James and Sarah had ambition, Mom added, shaking her head. They wanted to make something of themselves. I smiled, remembering the meeting I'd had last week with the partners of Wilson and Gray, the law firm where James was supposedly about to make partner. I'd acquired the firm 6 months ago, another quiet addition to my growing financial empire. The partners had been quite clear that my brother was actually nowhere near partnership track. You know what your problem is? Dad continued, warming to his favorite subject, my failures. You never think big picture. Never take risks. Always playing it safe with your little banking job. If he only knew, the little banking job was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the past decade, I'd built a financial services empire worth billions, all while maintaining the facade of a modest banking career. First Atlantic was just one of 17 banks I controlled across the country, along with investment firms, real estate companies, and yes, one prestigious law firm. Maybe you're right, I said, standing up. The weight of the moment, knowing what tomorrow would bring, made it hard to maintain my usual passive expression. Where are you going? Mom demanded. We're not finished with dinner. I think we are. I picked up my coat. Thanks for the lovely evening. Running away again, Dad scoffed. Just like always. You're nothing but a disappointment. Yes, I heard you the first dozen times. I paused at the door, looking back at my family. You might want to keep your phone handy tomorrow. I hear banks can be pretty strict about loan applications these days. The confusion on their faces almost made me smile. Almost. Later that night, in my real office, the one that occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise, I reviewed their loan application one final time. The business was in worse shape than they'd admitted. Without this loan, the company my father had spent 30 years building would collapse within months. My phone buzzed. James calling, right on schedule. Little brother, he started, his voice artificially cheerful. You left to dinner rather abruptly. Did I miss another recitation of your great legal victories? I asked mildly, signing off on a different acquisition. This one worth $300 million. Don't be like that. Dad's just concerned about you. We all are. Living so? Modestly. I thought about the document I'd received that morning, showing that James had been quietly borrowing money from the firm to cover his gambling debts, the same firm I now owned. Your concern is touching, I replied. How's the partnership coming along? A pause. It's progressing. These things take time. Indeed they do. I smiled at the irony. Say, didn't you handle some work for First Atlantic Bank a few years ago? Another pause, longer this time. Yes? Why? Just curious. Give my best to Mom and Dad. Tomorrow should be interesting. I hung up before he could respond, turning back to the loan application. With a single signature, I could save or destroy my family's legacy. The question was, after years of their constant criticism and dismissal, did I want to? The sun was setting over the city skyline as I made my decision. Tomorrow would change everything, for better or worse. The carefully constructed facade I'd maintained for a decade would finally crack. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Janet, my real executive assistant. Execute Protocol Omega. It's time. Her response was immediate. All set for tomorrow, sir. The documents are prepared. I walked to the window, watching the city lights blink to life one by one. In 12 hours, my family would learn the truth about their disappointment of a son. The bank teller who secretly controlled their financial fate. The irony would be spectacular. Monday morning dawned bright and clear. I arrived at First Atlantic's headquarters early, watching from my private elevator as employees filed into the building. None of them knew that the quiet personal banking advisor on the third floor was actually their boss. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Janet activated Protocol Omega. Every major executive at First Atlantic received an email announcing an emergency board meeting. Simultaneously, my family's loan application was escalated to priority status. My phone buzzed. Dad calling. Right on schedule. Michael? The bank just called about our loan application. They want us to come in immediately. I could hear the tension in his voice. The manufacturing company was his life's work, and its survival hinged on this loan. Really? I kept my voice neutral. That seems unusually fast. They said something about special instructions from the owner. Do you know anything about this? I'm just a bank teller, remember? I couldn't resist the small dig. But I'll see you when you get here. An hour later, I watched through my office's one-way glass as my parents were escorted into the building. They looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable than during last night's dinner. Mom was clutching her handbag like a shield. Dad's shoulders, usually squared with confidence, were tight with anxiety. "They're here," Janet announced through the intercom, along with Mr. James Miller and Miss Sarah Miller. Ah, they'd called in the successful siblings for support. Perfect. "Have them wait in the main conference room," I instructed. "Make sure the board members are there first." I gave them 20 minutes to stew. Through the security feeds, I watched my family interact with First Atlantic's top executives. Dad was trying to maintain his usual authoritative demeanor, but I could see the nervous tapping of his fingers. James was attempting to network, unaware that every person in that room now reported to his disappointment of a brother. At 10:30 sharp, I pressed the button that would begin the revelation. The conference room's massive screens lit up with the bank's ownership structure, a complex web of holding companies and investment vehicles that all led back to one name, Michael Miller. The door opened, and I walked in wearing a Tom Ford suit that cost more than Dad's car. The board members immediately stood, a chorus of "Good morning, Mr. Miller," filling the room. The look on my family's faces was priceless. "Hello, Dad," I said quietly. "Sleep well after dinner last night." He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. No words came out. "Michael?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. What is this?" "This," I gestured around the magnificent conference room, "is my bank. One of 17, actually, but who's counting?" James had gone pale, likely remembering all the legal work he'd done for First Atlantic. Work that had crossed my desk without him knowing. "That's impossible." Sarah finally found her voice. "You're a bank teller." "Personal banking advisor," I corrected with a smile. "It's a useful cover when you want to build something without family interference." I sat at the head of the table, enjoying the stunned silence. "Now, about that loan application." "You," Dad's face was flushing, but whether with anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. "All this time?" "Yes, all this time. While you were calling me a disappointment, mocking my little banking job, comparing me to my more successful siblings, I let the words hang in the air. I was building an empire." I nodded to Janet, who distributed folders to everyone present. "Inside, you'll find some interesting documents. The true state of Wilson and Gray Law Firm, which I acquired 6 months ago." I looked at James, who had gone even paler, including certain financial irregularities that the partners were kind enough to bring to my attention. James slumped in his chair. Mom gasped. "You'll also find details about the recent collapse of the Miami real estate deal that Sarah's been bragging about." I turned to my sister, the one that fell through because the financing was suddenly withdrawn by my bank. Sarah's perfectly manicured hands trembled as she opened the folder. And finally, I focused on my parents, a complete analysis of your manufacturing company. The missed payments, the hidden debts, the deferred maintenance. Everything you conveniently left off the loan application. "We can explain," Dad started, but I held up a hand. "No need. I've had my people analyzing the business for months. We know exactly what's wrong and what it would take to fix it." The silence in the room was deafening. Board members tried to look anywhere, but at my family's humiliation. Why? Mom's question was soft but clear. Why hide all this from us? I leaned forward, choosing my words carefully. Do you remember when I first started at Stanford? When I tried to tell you about my ideas for algorithmic trading and digital banking? Dad shifted uncomfortably, he remembered. You said I was dreaming too big, that I needed to be practical, follow the traditional path. Like James and Sarah. I smiled without humor. So I decided to build something on my own. No family connections, no expectations, no constant comparisons. Just pure merit. And the bank teller job, Sarah asked, gave me insights you can't get from the top floor. Every major executive in my company starts at entry level, though they don't know I'm the one requiring it. I opened my own folder, pulling out a single document. Now, about your loan. Dad straightened, his business instincts taking over. Given our relationship, I assume. That's not how I run my banks. I cut him off. Every loan application is evaluated on its merits. I slid the document across the table. Your company needs more than just a $2 million loan. It needs complete restructuring. They stared at the document. A comprehensive rescue plan that would save the business but require them to give up significant control. The choice is yours, I continued. Accept the plan, save the company, but work under my bank's oversight, or decline and try your luck elsewhere. Though I should mention we've acquired most of your other lending options over the past year. The boardroom fell silent as my family grappled with their new reality. The son they dismissed as a disappointment now held their financial fate in his hands. I stood up, straightening my jacket. Take some time to discuss it. Janet will show you to a private room. Oh, and Dad? He looked up, still shell-shocked. About that Stanford education you paid for? Consider this its return on investment. The next few weeks were a study in shifting power dynamics. My family's carefully constructed hierarchy, with me at the bottom, had been shattered, replaced by something none of us quite knew how to navigate. Dad accepted the restructuring plan, of course. He didn't have a choice, not if he wanted to save his company. But watching him sign the papers, his hand trembling slightly, I felt no triumph, just a strange emptiness where satisfaction should have been. You could have told us, he said quietly after the signatures were done. All these years, would it have made a difference? I asked. Or would you have just found new ways to be disappointed? He had no answer for that. The changes came swiftly after that. My team of financial experts descended on Dad's company, implementing the restructuring plan with surgical precision. Every inefficiency was identified, every wasteful process eliminated. It was painful to watch him struggle with losing control, but necessary for the company's survival. James was the first to try damage control. He showed up at my real office, not the modest third-floor workspace I'd used as cover, a week after the revelation. Look, about all those things I said, he started, fidgeting with his Italian silk tie. About my wasted potential, my lack of ambition, my embarrassing career choices. I kept my voice neutral as I signed off on a billion-dollar acquisition. I was wrong, obviously. He'd attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Who would have thought my little brother would end up owning my law firm? Speaking of which, I pulled out a file. Let's discuss your gambling debts. He paled. Michael, I can explain. No need. The firm's forensic accountants have explained everything quite thoroughly. $300,000 borrowed from client accounts. That's a serious ethical violation, James. Please, he whispered. You can't report this. my career would be over. I finished. You'd be disbarred. Probably face criminal charges. I let in sweat for a moment before continuing. Fortunately, the money has been repaid, anonymously, and the accounts reconciled. The partners have agreed to keep this quiet, provided you accept a transfer to our Singapore office. Singapore, he stammered. Fresh start. Away from the casinos. Take it or take your chances with the ethics board. He took it, of course. Sometimes help comes in the form of forced choices. Sarah was next, arriving in a storm of designer perfume and wounded pride. You deliberately sabotaged my deal, she accused, pacing my office. No, I protected my bank from a high-risk investment. I corrected. The Miami market is overvalued, and your numbers didn't add up. Any competent banker would have made the same decision. But I'm your sister. Exactly why I had to be extra careful about any appearance of favoritism. I met her gaze steadily. You want to be taken seriously in real estate. Build something real, not just a house of cards propped up by family connections. She left angry, but returned a week later with a solid proposal for a mixed-use development. I had my team review it thoroughly. No special treatment, and when it proved viable, approved the funding. Sometimes tough love is the best investment. Mom was the hardest to deal with. She showed up at my penthouse one evening, taking in the spectacular view with tears in her eyes. All those times I worried about you, she said softly. Wondering if you'd ever make something of yourself, if you'd ever live up to your potential. And all along, I was exceeding it, I replied, just not in the way you expected. Why the deception? Why let us think you were struggling? I poured us both a glass of wine, the same Bordeaux they'd ignored at that last family dinner. Remember when I was 10 and I won the state math championship? She nodded. Instead of celebrating, you and Dad immediately started talking about which competitions I should enter next, which achievements would look best for college applications. Every success just created pressure for the next one. We wanted you to excel, she protested. No, you wanted me to excel your way, on your terms, following your path. I sipped my wine. So I chose to build something away from all that pressure. Something that would succeed or fail based solely on its own merits. And now that we know, now we learn to be a family without the constant measuring and comparing, without the need to prove anything. The changes in our family dynamics came slowly, but steadily. Dad's company, under professional management, began to thrive. He gradually learned to be proud of its success without needing to control every decision. James found unexpected fulfillment in Singapore, away from his old enablers, and the pressure of living up to his own hype. He even met someone, a corporate lawyer who helped him face his gambling addiction. Sarah's development project succeeded on its own merits, teaching her the satisfaction of earning success rather than manipulating connections. She started mentoring young women in real estate, sharing lessons learned the hard way. Mom struggled the longest with our new reality, but eventually found her way to a different kind of maternal pride, one based on acceptance rather than expectations. As for me, I stepped out of the shadows, taking a more public role in my companies. The story of the secret banking empire made headlines for a while, but the media eventually moved on to newer sensations. 6 months after that fateful loan meeting, we had another Sunday dinner. Not at my parents' house this time, but at my penthouse. The conversation was different. Less comparison, more connection. Less judgment, more understanding. I have to ask, Dad said as we finished dessert, Do you ever regret it? The years of hiding your success. I thought about it, looking around at my family. James, relaxed and healthy after months of therapy. Sarah, discussing her latest project with genuine passion rather than bragging. Mom, finally learning to listen instead of evaluate. No, I said finally. We all needed to learn some hard lessons. About success, about family, about what really matters. And what really matters? Mom asked softly. Not the size of your bank account or the impressiveness of your title, I replied, but the integrity of your work and the authenticity of your relationships. Later that night, after everyone had left, I stood at my window looking out over the city. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Thank you for saving my company and for teaching me what real success looks like. I smiled, thinking about the long journey from disappointment to this moment. Sometimes the greatest success isn't in proving others wrong, but in helping them grow right alongside you. My phone buzzed again. Janet, with news about another potential acquisition. Tomorrow, I'd go back to building my empire, but tonight, I savored something rarer. A family finally learning to see each other clearly, without the distorting lens of expectations. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's the wisdom to know when to stop keeping score and start building bridges, even if those bridges are built with billion-dollar banks.